Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where strategy meets storytelling, unpacking the drama, decisions, and disasters of war so you understand not just what happened, but why it still matters. The views expressed on Mill History Talk are those of the hosts, writers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency, military organization, or institution. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Imagine standing in southern England on the night of June 5th, 1944. It's dark, cold, clouds hanging low over the airfields, and everywhere around you, engines. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Not fighters, not bombers. Transport aircraft, C-47s, loaded with paratroopers, towing gliders, preparing to disappear into the darkness over the English Channel. And here's the thing most people don't realize about D-Day. The invasion didn't begin at the beaches. It began hours earlier on airfields all over southern England.
Long before the first landing craft hit Omaha or Utah, the airborne assault was already underway. And the men flying those aircraft were about to attempt something no military in history had ever successfully done before.
A giant nighttime airborne invasion, in bad weather, at low altitude, through enemy anti-aircraft fire, using mostly dead reckoning, stopwatches, primitive radio navigation, and, honestly, what feels like sheer stubbornness.
Military history occasionally advances through technology, and occasionally through thousands of people collectively deciding, this sounds dangerous and complicated. Let's do it anyway.
Which is basically the unofficial slogan of airborne operations. June 6th, 1944. D-Day, the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. The largest amphibious invasion in history. And somehow, despite 82 years of books, documentaries, movies, podcasts, video games, prestige television, and approximately 4 million History Channel specials, there are still entire parts of D-Day that most people barely know happened.
Which is honestly impressive. D-Day has been covered so extensively that at this point, I assume there's probably a cooking show somewhere explaining Operation Overlord through Normandy-themed cupcakes.
I say, old man, today on the Great British Bake Off, hedgerow sponge cake.
And that's actually why we're doing this short series. Because as the 82nd anniversary approaches, we wanted to focus on the overlooked parts of D-Day. The systems, the organizations, the people who made the invasion possible, but somehow never became household names.
Welcome to episode 72 of Mill History Talk, the 9th Troop Carrier Command in the D-Day invasion.
The first of our two-part series on the lesser-known aspects of D-Day as the 82nd anniversary approaches. Tonight, the airborne assault, the transport crews, the glider operations, and the overlooked command that helped make Overlord possible. Tonight's episode is about the 9th Troop Carrier Command, the organization responsible for delivering and sustaining the American airborne assault over Normandy.
Which sounds dramatically less cool than Band of Brothers.
Yes, history has a branding problem.
It really does, because if somebody pitched this operation to Hollywood honestly, it would sound insane. Okay, so we're going to fly more than 1,000 transport aircraft across the English Channel, at night, in bad weather, towing gliders, while trying to deliver airborne troops to tiny landing zones under enemy fire. And somehow the response was, sounds reasonable.
The 9th Troop Carrier Command suffers from one of those common problems in military history. Everybody remembers the airborne troops. Almost nobody remembers the organization that actually got them there and sustained them through the fight.
It's a little like remembering the moon landing, but forgetting mission control. Or remembering the Avengers and forgetting the shield technicians desperately trying to keep the helicarrier from falling out of the sky.
Which, historically speaking, is really how almost all logistics operations go. If everything goes perfectly, nobody notices you exist. If you fail, civilization collapses immediately.
Brian has entered his logistics philosopher phase.
I never left it.
That's true. And logistics really matters here. Because 9th Troop Carrier Command wasn't just air transportation. This was combat aviation.
By June 1944, the 9th Troop Carrier Command controlled roughly 1,300 aircraft organized into 3 troop carrier wings and 15 troop carrier groups. That made it one of the largest tactical air mobility organizations in history.
And these crews weren't operating from safe rear areas. They were flying directly into combat zones at low altitude, at night, through clouds, under anti-aircraft fire, while towing gliders full of troops and equipment, full of combat-loaded paratroopers with additional ammunition and supply pallets slung under the fuselage.
And importantly, this was not the Air Transport Command. People confuse those constantly. Air Transport Command moved cargo between theaters. 9th Troop Carrier Command was a combat flying organization designed to conduct tactical airborne operations inside active combat zones. Very different mission, very different danger level.
What makes this even more impressive is how quickly 9th Troop Carrier Command had to evolve. The command activated in October 1943. That's only months before D-Day. Honestly, if you've ever watched a television series where the writers spend 3 seasons figuring out what the show is actually about, 9th Troop Carrier Command had less time than that to invent an entirely new way of making war.
And they were trying to master a form of warfare that nobody had truly perfected yet. Earlier airborne operations in Sicily and Italy exposed serious weaknesses: scattered drops, formation breakdowns, poor navigation, friendly fire incidents, confusion between airborne and transport units.
And here's where Hope goes full Clausewitz fangirl for a moment.
There it is! We made it 7 minutes into the show before the old dead German showed up. New record.
Clausewitz wins again. But seriously, this is classic friction. Everything looks elegant in planning. Then weather, fear, darkness, and human limitations show up like uninvited guests at a dinner party. Or like the third act of a disaster movie when everybody suddenly realizes the plan wasn't nearly as foolproof as they thought it was.
That's actually exactly what happened. So 9th Troop Carrier Command trained obsessively: night flying, formation assembly, low-altitude navigation, glider towing, timed releases, massive rehearsals with airborne units.
And the standards were unbelievably demanding. Pilots were expected to place airborne forces within roughly 1 mile of intended objectives, at night, without GPS, without modern navigation systems, in combat.
Modern people become emotionally unstable when Google Maps recalculates. These crews were navigating by stopwatch, landmarks, dead reckoning, and primitive radio aids while towing gliders through cloud cover.
I get nervous when my phone drops from 5 bars to 4. These guys were crossing the English Channel in darkness, trying to find tiny drop zones in occupied France while towing aircraft behind them. Not to mention tracers arcing up out of the darkness, flak explosions rocking the aircraft, and wingmen trying to keep going with engines on fire. Believe me, that's terrifying. And yet, operationally, the airborne assault still worked, which is one of the great ironies of D-Day. German commanders suddenly encountered American airborne troops everywhere. Roads blocked, communications disrupted, movement delayed, confusion spreading across huge areas. Instead of neat, concentrated airborne landings, the Germans got something that looked like military jazz improvisation. Or, in modern terms, imagine opening social media during a major breaking news event and discovering information is coming from everywhere at once, and none of it seems connected. That's basically what German commanders were experiencing on the ground.
Weaponized confusion.
Exactly. And ironically, the scattered drops may actually have increased German uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly where the main airborne effort was concentrated. Honestly, somewhere in Normandy, there was probably a German staff officer staring at a map and wondering if the Americans actually knew where they were landing. The funny part is that in some cases, the Americans were probably wondering the exact same thing.
Now let's talk about the gliders, because this may be the most underrated aspect of the Normandy airborne operation.
And pop culture has not helped. Gliders in movies are usually portrayed as giant flying plywood coffins.
Historically inaccurate. They were giant flying plywood coffins with operational significance.
Which may be the most military sentence ever spoken. But did it accomplish the mission? Tends to cover a multitude of sins. But seriously, the glider operations were incredibly important. Paratroopers alone could disrupt and confuse, but they could not sustain prolonged combat without heavy weapons and equipment.
The gliders delivered artillery, anti-tank guns, vehicles, engineering equipment, medical supplies, communication systems, and additional infantry.
And here's something many people don't realize. The glider operations were often considerably much more accurate than the parachute drops.
There's a logical reason for that. Glider pilots retained maneuver capability during final approach. They could visually adjust landings. Paratroopers depended almost entirely on accurate release timing from moving aircraft in darkness and cloud cover.
Once a parachute release point drifted, momentum and wind took over. But glider pilots could still compensate, even under terrible conditions.
Operations Chicago, which supported the 101st Airborne Division, and Detroit, which supported the 82nd Airborne Division, delivered substantial combat power surprisingly close to intended objectives. These first two glider operations came in soon after the airborne drops and carried anti-tank guns, jeeps, additional troops, communications equipment, and ammunition. And that mattered enormously.
Because this is what transformed the airborne divisions from scattered raiding forces into formations capable of sustained combat.
Now, none of this means glider operations were safe. Far from it. Glider warfare was brutally dangerous.
These aircraft were fragile, unpowered, landing in darkness, into hedgerows, flooded fields, obstacle-covered terrain, sometimes under enemy fire.
German anti-glider obstacles added additional danger. Poles, posts, field obstructions designed specifically to destroy incoming gliders.
And many gliders crashed violently. But here's the key point. Even badly damaged gliders often successfully delivered their cargo. And operationally, that cargo was what mattered. Honestly, if somebody pitched glider warfare in a movie script today, most audiences would reject it as unrealistic. You want me to believe they're going to tow a plywood aircraft across the English Channel, cut it loose, and crash land it in the dark behind enemy lines? Yes, that's exactly what happened. Oh, by the way, it is depicted really well in the classic D-Day movie, The Longest Day.
That is a great scene, even though it's the British attacking Pegasus Bridge. But the point is, a wrecked glider that delivered an artillery piece near the objective still contributed enormously to combat effectiveness.
And the 9th TCC operations didn't stop after the initial assault. Additional missions reinforced the airborne divisions throughout the campaign, including operations Keokuk, Elmira, Galveston, and Hackensack.
These operations brought in additional infantry, additional artillery, additional vehicles, more ammunition, more sustainment.
Returning aircraft also evacuated wounded personnel back to England. So 9th TCC effectively created an aerial bridge sustaining the airborne lodgement during its most vulnerable phase.
There is one part of the D-Day airborne story that often gets overlooked. the cost paid by the air crews themselves. Because while historians rightly focus on the airborne divisions, the men of 9th Troop Carrier Command were also flying directly into combat.
It's easy to forget that every C-47 over Normandy had a crew. Pilots, co-pilots, radio operators, crew chiefs, navigators. And unlike the paratroopers, they didn't get to stay on the ground after reaching France. They still had to fly home, through the same darkness, through the same weather, and often through the same anti-aircraft fire.
The scale of the operation was enormous. During the D-Day airborne assault, 9th Troop Carrier Command committed hundreds of C-47 transport aircraft and more than 500 gliders to deliver the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into Normandy. The command ultimately lost 42 C-47 aircraft destroyed or missing. Approximately 516 gliders participated in the operation. All were considered combat losses. Final casualty reports recorded 86 aircrew members killed. Another 130 aircrew members were wounded or injured. The glider force suffered heavily as well, with 57 glider pilots killed or missing.
Those numbers sound significant, and they are. But here's where the story gets interesting. When people hear airborne assault, they often imagine complete chaos in the sky. Hundreds of aircraft flying through darkness, cloud cover, anti-aircraft fire, and confusion, which, to be fair, is exactly what happened.
That description is technically accurate.
And yet, the actual loss rate was surprisingly low.
Exactly. The 42 C-47s lost represented roughly 2.5% of the transport aircraft committed to the operation. Given the circumstances, that was an extraordinarily low loss rate. Remember what these crews were doing, some of the most difficult and challenging combat flying of World War II.
Which sounds less like a military operation and more like somebody created a list titled, "Things Your Insurance Company Specifically Asked You Not to Do."
The fact that 9th Troop Carrier Command completed the largest airborne operation in history while sustaining losses at that level was considered a remarkable achievement by contemporary standards. In fact, troop carrier officers frequently compared their experience to the German airborne assault on Crete in 1941.
And that's a comparison worth making, because German airborne forces paid a terrible price during Crete, a price so severe that Hitler never again approved another large-scale German airborne invasion.
Precisely. By comparison, American troop carrier leaders viewed Normandy as proof that airborne operations could be conducted successfully on a massive scale without catastrophic losses. The command delivered 2 airborne divisions, thousands of paratroopers, hundreds of gliders, artillery, vehicles, anti-tank guns, ammunition, and supplies. And it did so while suffering losses far below what many planners had feared before the invasion.
Which is one of those moments where history can be deceptive, because we tend to focus on the scattered drops, the confusion, the stories of paratroopers landing in the wrong fields, and all of that happened. But from the perspective of the men running the operation, the truly remarkable thing was that so much of it worked.
And it worked because thousands of pilots, crewmen, mechanics, and glider pilots executed an extraordinarily difficult mission under combat conditions.
The airborne troops deserved every bit of the recognition they've received over the last 82 years. But so did the crews of 9th Troop Carrier Command, because every paratrooper who jumped over Normandy got there because somebody flew him there. And many of those crews paid a price that deserves to be remembered alongside the more famous stories of D-Day.
So how should we judge the 9th Troop Carrier Command? If judged purely by textbook precision, the operation was imperfect. The drops scattered badly, weather disrupted formations, navigation broke down.
But war isn't graded like a geometry exam.
Though somewhere there is probably a German staff officer who wanted to.
Operationally, the mission succeeded. The airborne divisions disrupted German movement, protected Utah Beach, created confusion across the battlefield, and survived long enough for the invasion to consolidate.
and the glider operations delivered the combat power necessary to sustain that success, which is why the 9th Troop Carrier Command deserves far more attention than it usually receives.
Sometimes, history remembers the men who jumped and forgets the men who flew them there.
The commanders at the time understood the importance and bravery of the command. Many of the groups and squadrons earned distinguished unit citations, the equivalent of today's Presidential Unit Citation, for their extraordinary performance during the Normandy airborne assault. The awards recognize the courage of the C-47 crews and glider pilots who flew through darkness, weather, and flak to deliver the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions into battle.
General Ridgway said the men of the 9th Troop Carrier Command were as skilled as any aviators I ever knew. And that's a wrap for our look at this unique aspect of the airborne operations in Normandy. Next episode, we head to the beaches, to another overlooked part of D-Day, the tank battalions whose armored support helped keep Omaha and Utah from becoming disasters.
Yes, the Sherman tanks finally get their revenge against decades of internet slander, especially Tom Hanks saying, "No armor has made it ashore," in the famous opening scene of the movie Saving Private Ryan.
That episode may emotionally heal Brian and all of our tank and armor listeners.
Unlikely.
Until next time, remember, history isn't dusty. It's human beings improvising under pressure, making impossible decisions with incomplete information, usually while something important is on fire.
Preferably not the aircraft.
Right, Brian. Preferably not the aircraft. Thanks for joining us on Mill History Talk. See you next time for Tanks on the Beaches.